At 6:18 on the evening of my 72nd birthday, my son sent me 11 words that changed the way I understood my family. Emergency at the Maple Street job. I can't make dinner. Sorry, Dad. There was no phone call, no explanation, and no mention of the reservation he had asked me to make 3 weeks earlier. Just 11 words on a screen, followed by a thumbs-up symbol that looked almost cheerful. I was standing in my kitchen with a pot roast cooling on the counter. Daniel had told me he missed the meals his mother used to make, so I had taken Elaine's old recipe card from the blue tin above the refrigerator and followed her handwriting line by line. I had even bought the expensive mushrooms she used only on special occasions. The table was set for 4, because Daniel had said Melissa and Sophie would come too. 4 plates, 4 glasses, 4 folded napkins. In the center sat a small chocolate cake with the number 72 written in white icing. I read his message twice. Then I called. Daniel answered on the 4th ring. His voice was low and hurried. "Dad, I'm sorry. A supply line burst in one of the units. I've got water coming through a ceiling." "Do you need help?" I asked. I had spent 31 years as a municipal building inspector. A burst line was not beyond my usefulness. "No. The crew is here. It's a mess, and I can't talk." "What about Melissa and Sophie?" There was a pause. In the background, I thought I heard glass touching glass, but I told myself it was a tool dropping on concrete. "Melissa took her mother to an appointment," he said. "Sophie is studying at Kayla's. We'll do something this weekend." "All right. Don't wait up." He ended the call before I could remind him that a father does not usually wait up for a 43-year-old man. I stood in the kitchen until the refrigerator motor came on. I put the roast in the oven on its lowest setting, covered the cake, and removed 3 place settings from the table. I left my own plate where it was, but I could not bring myself to sit down. Elaine had been gone 4 years. The first birthday after her death, Daniel had brought Chinese food and stayed until midnight. The second year, Melissa arranged a brunch. The third, they sent a gift basket because Patricia had a charity event. By the 4th, my birthday had become something we would do this weekend. I knew families changed. I knew teenagers had plans and adults had obligations. What hurt was not that Daniel was busy. What hurt was the ease of the lie. At 7:05, I put on my navy jacket and drove toward Lake and Elm, the restaurant where Elaine and I had celebrated our 40th anniversary. I had no reservation, and I did not want one. I simply wanted to eat somewhere that did not contain 4 plates waiting for people who had chosen not to come. The hostess recognized my name from an old account and found me a small table near the back. "Dining alone tonight, Mr. Bennett?" she asked. "Just me." "Are we celebrating anything?" I almost said no. Then I decided I had already helped my family erase enough of the evening. "It's my birthday," she smiled. "Then we'll make sure you don't leave without dessert." I followed her past the bar. The restaurant was bright without being loud, all pale wood and white tablecloths, with tall windows facing the river. Halfway across the room, I heard my son laugh. Daniel had a particular laugh when he was nervous. It began too loudly and ended with his hand touching the back of his neck. I had heard it when he dented my truck at 17, when he asked me to help with his first down payment, and when he told me a business investment was almost guaranteed. I turned toward the sound. He was sitting in a curved booth beneath a painting of the river. Melissa sat beside him in a cream-colored dress. Patricia Monroe sat across from them in a red jacket, holding a champagne glass at shoulder height. There was no plumber, no wet work shirt, and no emergency. Daniel wore the charcoal suit I had bought him for Sophie's middle school graduation. On the table between them lay a leather folder, 3 color photographs, and a map. Even from 20 feet away, I recognized the gray stone chimney and green shutters of my cottage at Lake Wren. The hostess glanced back at me. "Mr. Bennett, would you mind giving me a moment?" She nodded and moved toward my table. I remained near a wooden partition holding potted ferns. I was not trying to spy. That is what I told myself, anyway. I was trying to understand why my house was part of a dinner from which I had been excluded. Patricia lifted her glass higher. "To Friday," she said, "and to finally putting dead equity to work." Melissa smiled. "Once the transfer is recorded, the title company releases the commitment. We can close before the balloon date." Daniel did not lift his glass. "He may read the whole packet." "He never reads the whole packet when you tell him it's routine," Melissa said. "You handled his hospital forms. You handled the cottage insurance. He trusts you." "He used to trust me," Daniel said. Patricia leaned forward. "Then remind him what family means. He has a paid-off house, a pension, and a cottage sitting empty half the year." Monroe House supports 27 people. If he makes this about sentiment, tell him Sophie's future is tied to ours. Melissa tapped one of the papers. He'll sign it Friday. He thinks we're updating the estate plan. My mouth went dry. Daniel looked down at the table. For 1 second, I believed he might object. Instead, he picked up his champagne and said, "No surprises when we get there. If he feels cornered, he'll shut down." They had planned my reaction as carefully as the loan. A waiter crossed between us carrying a tray. When he passed, Patricia was saying something about an appraisal of $640,000. Melissa turned a page. At the bottom, below a block of small type, I saw a name printed in capital letters. Franklin R. Bennett, grantor. I felt the room tilt, though I had not moved. My cottage was not abandoned property. Elaine and I had bought it after 28 years of marriage, one paycheck and one repair at a time. We had replaced the roof ourselves. Daniel had learned to swim from its narrow dock. Sophie's height was marked in pencil on the pantry door. After Elaine died, I had placed the cottage in my revocable living trust, with written instructions that Sophie's education and future housing could be supported after I was gone. It was not dead equity. It was one of the last places in the world where my wife's laughter still seemed close. I stepped back before any of them saw me. The hostess was waiting beside my table with a menu. I could have walked over to the booth. I could have placed both hands on their white tablecloth and asked my son how a burst pipe had turned into champagne. Part of me wanted the whole restaurant to hear the answer. But anger is useful only if it tells you where to look. Mine was pointing at the folder. I sat down with my back partly toward them. I ordered meatloaf because it was the first item I saw. My hands shook once when I unfolded my napkin, then stopped. For the next 40 minutes, I listened to their voices rise and fall behind me while I wrote details on the back of the paper drink menu. Friday at 10. Western Lakes title. 640 appraisal. Balloon date on the 28th. Estate packet. Old power of attorney. That last phrase mattered most. 3 years earlier, I had undergone hip surgery. Before the operation, I signed a durable financial power of attorney naming Daniel to pay bills and deal with insurance if I could not. The attorney who prepared it had included restrictions against gifting my property to the agent or transferring it for the agent's benefit. I had recovered quickly and resumed managing everything myself. The document remained valid because I had never revoked it. I believed having it in a drawer did no harm. Behind me, Patricia laughed. By Christmas, that old cottage will finally be earning something. The hostess brought a slice of chocolate torte with one thin candle. She placed it in front of me and whispered, "I didn't want the whole room to sing unless you asked." "Thank you," I said. The flame trembled between us. In the dark window beyond the table, I could see the reflection of Daniel's booth. My son was smiling now. Melissa had one hand on his shoulder. Patricia was signing the restaurant check. I blew out the candle without making a wish. When I stood, Daniel finally saw me. His face emptied. The glass stopped halfway to his mouth. Melissa followed his stare, then quickly closed the leather folder. Patricia did not look embarrassed. She looked irritated, as if I had arrived early to a meeting. "Dad," Daniel said. He slid out of the booth. "What are you doing here?" "Having dinner." His eyes moved to the small dessert plate in my hand, then to the clock above the bar. "I can explain?" "The pipe?" I asked. He rubbed the back of his neck. It was handled faster than expected. "And Melissa's appointment?" Melissa stood. "Frank, this is a business dinner for my mother. We were going to celebrate with you this weekend." Patricia folded her napkin. "There is no reason to make a scene." I looked at her. "I haven't made one." Daniel stepped closer and lowered his voice. "Please, Dad, let me come by tomorrow. Friday at 10 will be soon enough." Melissa's expression changed so slightly that Daniel did not notice. I did. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the folder. "How do you know about Friday?" she asked. "You should finish your champagne." I walked out before they could decide which lie to use next. As I reached the door, the hostess hurried after me carrying a white bakery box. "Your torte," she said. "You barely touched it." I took the box and thanked her. Through the glass behind us, I saw Daniel pulling out his phone. It began ringing before I reached my truck. I did not answer. On the drive home, I kept thinking about one sentence. He trusts you. Melissa had said it as if my trust were not a relationship but a tool left unattended. The truth was worse than being forgotten on my birthday. My son had not chosen another dinner by accident. He had chosen the one table where my absence made their plan easier. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I had 6 missed calls. 3 from Daniel, 2 from Melissa, 1 from Patricia. I carried the untouched cake box into the house, set it beside the cold pot roast, and went straight to the fireproof cabinet in my study. The original power of attorney was in a green folder between my trust and Elaine's death certificate. I read every page. On page 6, in language Daniel had once called unnecessary legal clutter, were the words I needed. My agent shall have no authority to make gifts to himself, transfer real property to an entity in which he or his spouse holds an interest, or change any beneficiary designation. I copied the document, the trust, and the cottage deed. Then I wrote the date and time on a yellow pad. At 8:56, Daniel sent another message. Please don't misunderstand tonight. Friday is just about simplifying things for everyone. At 9:02, Melissa wrote, the cottage remains yours. This helps the whole family and protects Sophie. At 9:11, Patricia wrote, your wife would have understood that property should serve the living. That was the message that ended my hesitation. Patricia had known Elaine for 13 years. She had accepted her hospitality, eaten at her table, and stood at her funeral. She had no right to use my dead wife as leverage for a loan she had been too proud to explain. I did not reply to any of them. I opened my laptop and searched for attorneys in Western Michigan who handled both real estate disputes and financial exploitation of older adults. I read biographies, disciplinary histories, and client reviews until nearly midnight. I wrote down 3 names. Then I took 1 plate from the cupboard, served myself a small piece of the birthday cake, and ate it alone at the table I had set for 4. I did not know yet how much money had already moved through my cottage. I did not know my signature had been copied onto 2 documents. I did not know that, within 3 weeks, my own son would stand in court and ask a judge to take control of my finances. I knew only this. Friday's meeting would not happen the way they expected. Elaine and I met in 1979 over a condemned staircase. I was 25, newly hired by the city, and too serious for my age. She was 23 and working at a neighborhood housing nonprofit. The owner of an old duplex insisted the stairs could be saved. I said the stringers were split and the rise was unsafe. Elaine listened to us argue for 5 minutes, then asked why we were treating saved and safe as opposite words. She found a carpenter who reused the banister while rebuilding the structure. I approved the work. 6 months later, I asked her to dinner. That was Elaine. She could preserve what mattered without pretending damaged things were sound. We had 1 child, Daniel. He arrived after 2 miscarriages and grew up with the kind of love that sometimes becomes dangerous because the parents are so grateful to have the child that they forget he must also learn disappointment. I taught him to ride a bicycle, change a tire, read a floor plan, and apologize when he broke a window. What I did not teach him was how to sit inside another person's anger without surrendering his judgment. Whenever conflict came, I stepped in. If he owed money, I helped. If a coach treated him unfairly, I called. If his first landlord kept the deposit, I wrote the letter. Elaine warned me. You keep clearing the road, she said once, and he'll never learn what kind of man he is when something blocks it. I told her that was what fathers did. Fathers also let sons carry weight. Daniel was not cruel. That made the truth harder, not easier. He was warm, funny, and generous when generosity cost him little. He remembered the names of waiters. He fixed neighbors' gutters. He could spend an afternoon building shelves for Sophie's school and then avoid 1 honest conversation for 6 months. His weakness was not that he enjoyed hurting people. His weakness was that he would allow almost any hurt if preventing it required him to disappoint the person standing closest to him. When he married Melissa, I liked her. She had grown up moving between rentals while Patricia tried to build Monroe House from a failing roadside inn into a wedding and banquet venue. Melissa knew what instability felt like. She color-coded bills, kept spare batteries in labeled drawers, and never let her car fall below half a tank. Elaine said Melissa's need for control came from fear, and that patience would help her feel secure. For years, it seemed to. Daniel and Melissa bought a modest house. Sophie was born healthy. Patricia's venue grew busy enough to employ cooks, servers, groundskeepers, and an office staff. Sunday dinners moved between our home and Monroe House. We were not 1 family exactly, but 2 families learning how to share a middle. The balance changed after Elaine died. Cancer took her in 11 months. In the last week, when speaking cost more strength than she had, she asked me to take her to Lake Wren 1 final time. We wrapped her in blankets on the passenger seat, and Daniel drove while I sat beside her. At the cottage, Sophie curled up near Elaine on the old porch swing. Elaine touched the pencil marks on the pantry door and told Sophie, "Your grandfather and I built this place slowly. Slow things can be strong." Later, while Daniel carried bags to the car, Elaine asked me to promise that the cottage would remain a place Sophie could come to without owing anyone anything. "Not even us?" I asked. "Especially not us," she said. "Love should not arrive with an invoice." After the funeral, I changed my estate plan. The cottage and my house went into a revocable trust. I remained trustee and could sell or mortgage either property if I chose. After my death, an independent successor trustee would manage the assets. Sophie could receive education funds and, later, help with a first home. Daniel would receive other assets, but he would not be able to pledge the cottage for his own debts. I did not do that because I distrusted him. I did it because Elaine and I both knew he struggled to say no when someone he loved was in trouble. I told Daniel the broad terms. He said he understood. Melissa said it was needlessly complicated, but dropped the subject. The cottage followed the same pattern. Melissa suggested listing it for 8 summer weeks to cover taxes and maintenance. I agreed on 3 conditions. No more than 8 weeks, no events, and all income deposited into a separate cottage account I could review. She created the listing, hired cleaners, and sent me neat quarterly summaries. The first year showed $12,000 in gross rent and almost $9,000 after expenses. I used part of it for a new septic pump and left the rest for repairs. The second year, the summaries became less detailed. Melissa said the rental platform had changed reports. The third year, she said demand had fallen. I accepted what she sent because challenging her over a few $1,000s felt petty. Besides, Daniel had access under the power of attorney if anything needed attention. That document came from my hip surgery. The surgeon expected an uncomplicated procedure, but Elaine's death had taught me that expected and guaranteed were different words. Daniel sat beside me at the attorney's office and promised to use the authority only if I could not act. For 2 weeks, he paid my bills and spoke to the insurer. After I recovered, I resumed control. I considered revoking the document, then decided it might be useful during another emergency. The emergency, as it turned out, belonged to Patricia. Monroe House looked successful from the road. White columns, clipped hedges, new lighting, and photographs of smiling brides beneath strings of glass bulbs. What I did not see was the floating rate loan Patricia had taken to build a ballroom addition, the cost overruns, the canceled winter events, and the balloon payment due that fall. Daniel knew some of it because his company had managed part of the construction. Melissa knew all of it because she kept her mother's books. They did not tell me. Instead, 6 weeks before my birthday, Daniel asked whether I had considered consolidating the trust documents. "Just so Sophie isn't dealing with a mess someday," he said. I told him my attorney had retired, but the plan was sound. Melissa found a title company that can update everything in one appointment. What needs updating? Beneficiary language, mailing addresses, routine things. We set the appointment for the Friday after my birthday. I did not connect it to Melissa's new questions about the cottage appraisal or Patricia's sudden interest in whether my pension covered all my expenses. I did not connect it to the extra summer weekends when Melissa claimed friends were using the property. I saw each detail separately because seeing them together would have required me to consider something I did not want to believe. My son was helping his wife prepare to use my property without my informed consent. At 8:30 the morning after my birthday, I called the first attorney on my list. Her receptionist said Miss Ortiz had an opening at 11 due to a canceled mediation. I gathered my documents and drove downtown. Lena Ortiz's office occupied the second floor of a converted brick schoolhouse. She did not have mahogany walls or photographs of herself shaking hands with politicians. She had metal file cabinets, 2 healthy plants, and a whiteboard covered with deadlines. She listened without interrupting while I described the dinner, the photographs, and the old power of attorney. When I finished, she asked, "What do you know, and what are you assuming?" It was the right question. I know they were discussing a transfer involving my cottage. I know a lender's appraisal was mentioned. I know they expect me to sign something Friday. I assume the transfer secures Patricia's business loan. Did you photograph the documents? No. Record the conversation? No. Then we begin with the power of attorney and the title, not the dinner. She explained that a competent person could revoke a power of attorney at any time. Revocation would not erase an act already taken, so speed mattered. She also explained that the restrictions in my document appeared to prohibit Daniel from transferring my property to himself, Melissa, or an entity benefiting them. But a title company or bank might not know about the restrictions unless someone actually read the document. People hear power of attorney and imagine ownership, Lena said. It is not ownership. It is borrowed authority, and borrowed authority has boundaries. We prepared a revocation that morning. I signed it before an independent notary. Lena sent notices to Daniel, my banks, my investment custodian, Western Lakes Title, and the County Register of Deeds. She ordered a current title search and asked the title company to flag any attempted filing involving the cottage. At 12:40, Daniel called while I was still in her conference room. I put the phone on speaker after telling him Lena was present. "Dad, what did you do?" he asked. "I revoked the power of attorney." "Why would you do that without talking to me?" "It was my authority to give and mine to take back." The title company just canceled Friday. Then Friday was not merely about changing an address. He was silent. Lena slid a pad toward me, but I did not need the question she had written. I asked my own. "What did you plan for me to sign? A restructuring document? For whose structure?" "Dad, Patricia's business is under temporary pressure. There is a bridge loan. The cottage would only provide secondary security. You told me it was an estate update, because I knew you would refuse before hearing the details. You were right about the refusal." His voice hardened. 27 people could lose their jobs. Then Patricia should show her books to a lender and offer her own assets. She has. Not enough, apparently. "You have $600,000 sitting by a lake." There it was. Not my cottage. Not the place his mother loved. $600,000 sitting by a lake. "Who completed the appraisal?" I asked. "Melissa arranged it." "Who gave permission to enter?" "I did, under the power of attorney." Lena wrote 3 words on the pad. "Ask about transfer." Was the cottage going into Patricia's name? "No. An LLC." "Who owns the LLC?" Another silence. "Daniel?" "Melissa and I are members. Patricia has a minority interest until the loan is repaid." I closed my eyes. "You formed a company to hold my cottage, gave your mother-in-law an interest, and expected me to sign the deed without telling me. We expected you to help your family. Help asked for, honestly, is help. This is something else. You're making it sound criminal. I'm describing it accurately. If that sounds criminal to you, listen to yourself." He ended the call. Lena did not congratulate me for standing up to him. She circled something in her notes. He admitted the entity exists, the appraisal was ordered, and he used the power of attorney to authorize access. Write down his exact words while they are fresh. I did. At 2:15, the title report arrived. The cottage was still titled in my trust. No deed or mortgage had been recorded. That was the first good news. The report also showed that Western Lakes Title had opened an order 6 days earlier for a proposed transfer to an entity called Bennett Monroe Holdings, LLC. That was the first proof. I spent the next 3 days learning how much a person could miss while believing he was being kept informed. The cottage rental account was the obvious place to start. I logged into the platform and discovered my password no longer worked. When I requested a reset, the confirmation went to an email address I did not recognize. LakeRenHosting@bmhstay.com. The initials matched Bennett Monroe Holdings. I called the platform, verified my identity, produced the deed and old account records, and asked for a complete activity archive. The representative warned me it could take several days. An hour later, Melissa called. "You're locking us out of bookings that are already paid," she said without saying hello. "How many bookings?" "I don't have that in front of me. You have managed the cottage for 3 years. This is exactly why Daniel worried about you handling things impulsively. Requesting records for my property is not impulsive. It is when guests are arriving next week. You told me the cottage was empty next week." She corrected herself too late. "I meant later in the month. Send me the current calendar, every rental statement, and the bank account where deposits were made. Our accountant has those. Then your accountant can send them." Her voice became softer. Melissa often used softness the way Patricia used charm. Not to reduce pressure, but to make resistance look unreasonable. "Frank, I know you're hurt about dinner. Daniel made a terrible decision. But please don't confuse a family mistake with financial misconduct. Send the records. We will discuss everything in person. Records first." She hung up. The quarterly summaries she had provided were in my filing cabinet. I spread them across the dining table and created a simple calendar. According to Melissa, the cottage had been rented 43 nights the previous year. I then searched public reviews for the property. Guests had posted comments dated during weekends, the summaries marked vacant. A wedding photographer had uploaded pictures of a bridal party on my dock, though I had expressly prohibited events. Another guest praised the new downstairs wine room and private chef service. There was no wine room when I last visited in April. At 7 the next morning, I drove to Lake Wren. The cottage stood at the end of a gravel lane bordered by red pine. I had built the porch with Daniel the summer he turned 19. The green shutters needed paint, and leaves had gathered in the gutters, but from the road it looked unchanged. Then I saw the small black lockbox attached to the railing and a white van parked beside the shed. A sign near the door read, "Wren House Private Retreat." My key no longer fit the front lock. A young man in a chef's coat opened the door after I knocked. Behind him, 2 women were arranging flowers around my dining table. Cases of wine stood where Elaine's reading chair had been. "Can I help you?" he asked. "I'm Frank Bennett. I own this house." His expression shifted from annoyance to alarm. "We booked through Bennett Monroe. We have a corporate dinner tonight." "How many people?" 22. I looked past him. The pantry door with Sophie's height marks had been removed. In its place was a glass-fronted beverage cabinet. "Who authorized these changes?" I asked. The chef showed me an email on his phone. It was signed by Melissa as managing member of Bennett Monroe Holdings. The booking contract described the cottage as our exclusive lakefront hospitality property. I did not remove the guests. They had paid in good faith, and 22 people arriving for dinner did not need to become pieces in my family's argument. I photographed the sign, the lockbox, the altered room, and the email. I told the chef the event could proceed, but no future booking should be accepted until ownership was clarified. Then I called a locksmith and waited on the porch. While I waited, I walked to the pantry door. It had been placed face down behind the shed beneath a tarp with broken shelving. I lifted it carefully. The pencil lines were still there. Sophie, age 6. Sophie, age 9. Sophie, age 12. Elaine had written the dates in blue ink. The wood was damp along one edge, but salvageable. I carried it to my truck. When the locksmith arrived, he asked for identification and proof of ownership. I was glad he did. I showed both. He changed the locks and gave me a written receipt stating that the prior cylinder appeared to have been installed about a year earlier. I placed a temporary notice inside the entry, directing all booking questions to Lena's office. On the drive home, grief arrived in a form I had not expected. I was not crying over money. I was crying over a pantry door. That is the part people who treat property as numbers never understand. A place becomes valuable because life has touched it. Remove the marks, change the locks, call it an underused asset, and you can pretend no one was harmed. But the marks had not disappeared. They were in the back of my truck. The platform archive came that afternoon. Melissa had not rented the cottage for 8 weeks a year. During the previous 26 months, she had booked it for 187 nights, including 5 private dinners and 3 small wedding events. Gross receipts totaled $89,400. After legitimate platform fees, cleaning, utilities, and repairs, $51,870 should have remained. My cottage account had received $14,200. The rest had gone to an account in the name of Bennett Monroe Holdings. Some expenses were real. The new locks, furniture, event insurance, and wine cabinetry had been paid from that account. Others had nothing to do with Lake Wren. Monroe House payroll, linen rentals for the ballroom, Patricia's vehicle lease, and a $12,000 transfer labeled Owner Advance. The reports did not tell me which owner received it. I sent everything to Lena. She replied with one sentence, "Do not confront them until we preserve the bank records." That evening, someone knocked on my front door. Through the glass, I saw Daniel holding the chocolate cake from my refrigerator. He had used his old key. I opened the door but did not invite him in. "You changed the cottage locks," he said. "You changed them first." He looked at the cake box in his hands. "Can we start over?" "Which part?" "Your birthday. The dinner. All of it." "A birthday is a date, Daniel. It isn't a page you can tear out and replace." He shifted his weight. He had not slept well. There were gray hollows under his eyes and a line of dried mud along one shoe. For an instant, I felt the old instinct to move aside, make coffee, and solve whatever had frightened him. That instinct had helped bring us to the doorway. "I panicked," he said. "Patricia's loan deadline is close. Melissa told me if we explained it at dinner, you'd feel ambushed, so we canceled. That was wrong. You canceled dinner with me and held the ambush somewhere else. The cottage would not be lost. The loan has cash flow. Monroe House is booked solid next summer. Then why will no bank lend against Monroe House alone?" He looked toward the street. "The construction loan comes due before the season begins." "How much?" $286,000 on the balloon. With repairs and reserves, the new facility is asking for $525. And my cottage would secure all of it? As additional collateral. The LLC structure protects you. An LLC owned by you, Melissa, and Patricia does not protect me after I deed my property into it. You would have a membership interest. How much? He did not answer. You don't know, I said. The operating agreement isn't final. But the champagne was open. His face tightened. You think we were celebrating taking something from you? We were celebrating saving a business that feeds families, with a house that does not belong to you. It will belong to me someday. The sentence came out before he could stop it. I looked at my son for a long moment. No, I said. You assumed it would. He lowered the cake. Are you disinheriting me over one bad decision? I haven't said anything about inheritance. I am talking about my property while I am alive. It is all connected, only to people who count a living man's belongings as future inventory. He stepped closer. Dad, Sophie could lose her home if Melissa and I have to cover Patricia's debts. Why would you have to cover them? He looked away again. The answer stood between us. What did you guarantee? I asked. Some of the construction overruns. How much? 80,000. With what collateral? Our home equity line. The chain was clearer now. Patricia's venue owed the bank. Daniel and Melissa had tied their house to Patricia's cost overruns. My cottage was supposed to rescue all three. You made that choice without me, I said. You do not get to make the next choice with my name. He held out the cake box as if it were evidence of sincerity. At least let me come in. Not tonight. I'm your son. That is why this hurts. It is not a key. He looked down at the cake, then back at me. His anger came slowly, mixed with fear. Melissa says this lawyer is putting ideas in your head. The ideas were printed on your title order. You're 72. You live alone. People can be influenced without realizing it. The threat was quiet enough that he may not have recognized it as one. I did. Go home, Daniel. He left the cake on my porch and walked to his car. I watched until his taillights disappeared. Then I picked up the box. Inside, the icing had smeared against one side. The number 2 was broken in half. I threw the cake away. The following morning, Lena received a letter from an attorney representing Bennett Monroe Holdings. It accused me of interfering with valid rental contracts, damaging the business, and changing locks on property operated under delegated authority. It demanded that access be restored within 24 hours. Attached was a copy of a property management authorization bearing my signature. I had never seen it before. The signature looked convincing at first. My full name slanted upward. The B in Bennett had the loop I used, and the final T crossed back over itself. But the date was 14 months earlier, on a Tuesday when I had been in the city permit office helping a former colleague review an accessibility dispute. More important, the signature was exactly the same as one I had placed on a cottage insurance claim 3 years earlier. Not similar. Exact. The same stray dot appeared beneath the F. The same ink gap divided the second N. Someone had lifted it from an old document. Lena enlarged both pages on her monitor and aligned them. This is not proof of who copied it, she said, but it is strong evidence you did not write it twice. The authorization named Melissa as manager and allowed unlimited rentals, events, alterations, and deposit of income into any account she designated. It also claimed I had approved Bennett Monroe Holdings as the exclusive operator. Daniel had the insurance claim in his files after my surgery, I said. So might Melissa. Are we calling the police? Lena folded her hands. That is your decision. But we should first notify the rental platform, the bank receiving the funds, and the title insurer. A rushed criminal complaint will not restore records if accounts are emptied. Preserve first, accuse second. We sent written disputes and preservation notices. My bank opened a fraud case. The rental platform froze future payouts. Lena requested the formation papers and transaction history of Bennett Monroe Holdings through formal demand. At 4 that afternoon, Sophie called from a number I did not recognize. Grandpa? Her voice was barely above a whisper. Sophie, where are you? At school. I'm using the counselor's phone. I sat down. Are you safe? Yes. Mom took my phone because I said I wanted to see you. Why did she do that? She says you're confused and that a lawyer is turning you against us. There are sentences no grandfather is prepared to hear. I kept my voice steady. Have I seemed confused to you? No. But Dad said you forgot your property taxes last year. I had. The bill had gone to an old post office box, and I paid it 11 days late with a penalty. Daniel knew because the county notice had arrived while I recovered from pneumonia. I made a mistake with one bill, I said. That is not the same as being unable to manage my life. She began to cry. Is Grandma Patricia going to lose Monroe House because of you? The question told me how the story had been framed. Patricia may lose Monroe House because it owes more money than it can pay. I did not borrow that money. Mom says you promised the cottage would help all of us. I promised the cottage would help your education someday. I did not promise it for Patricia's loan. They keep fighting. Dad slept downstairs. Mom said if you don't sign, we might lose our house too. I closed my eyes. This was the leverage Patricia had described at dinner. Sophie's future is tied to ours. They had turned a 16-year-old girl into a messenger carrying adult debt. Listen to me, I said. You are not responsible for Monroe House, your parents' loan, my cottage, or any decision the adults make. Not $1 of this belongs on your shoulders. Are you mad at Dad? Yes, she sniffed. Are you going to stop loving him? I took longer to answer than I wish I had. Love and trust are different things. I love your father. I do not trust him with my property right now. Can I come see you? I want that. But I will not ask you to hide or disobey your parents. Tell your counselor you want a family meeting with a neutral adult present. I will come. Okay. Before she ended the call, she said, I'm sorry we missed your birthday. Mom told me you wanted to be alone. I stared at the blank wall after the line went quiet. The lie about the dinner had not been told only to me. They had told Sophie I rejected her. That hurt more than seeing the folder. The school counselor arranged a meeting for Monday afternoon. Daniel came alone. Melissa claimed a work conflict. Sophie sat between us at a round table while the counselor established rules. No discussion of loan documents, no asking Sophie to choose sides, and no accusations about either parent or grandparent. For 20 minutes, we talked about school, soccer, and her upcoming driver's test. Sophie relaxed enough to laugh when I told her I still remembered Daniel failing parallel parking twice. Daniel smiled too. For a moment, the three of us resembled the family we had been. Then Sophie asked, Can I go to Lake Wren with Grandpa next month? Daniel's smile disappeared. The cottage is involved in a legal dispute. Who is disputing Grandpa owns it? She asked. He looked at me. No one is disputing ownership. Then why can't I go? The counselor reminded us not to put Sophie in the middle. Daniel leaned back. Because Dad changed the locks without considering existing commitments. You mean the strangers having dinners there? Sophie asked. He turned toward her. Who told you that? Mom. She was yelling about it. I saw fear move across his face. Not fear of me, fear that the controlled story was no longer controlled. After the meeting, Daniel stopped me in the hallway. You are making her anxious. She was anxious before she called me. If you cared about her stability, you would not threaten the business supporting her family. Your business is not supported by my cottage. Everything is separate to you. Your house, your cottage, your money. Have you ever considered that maybe Mom held us together and, after she died, all you know how to do is inspect people for violations? The accusation found its mark because some of it was true. I had spent a career noticing what did not meet code. After Elaine died, I had become quieter and more rigid. I did not always say when I was lonely. I waited for invitations instead of making them. But truth inside an accusation does not make the entire accusation true. I should have reached for you more, I said. That does not give you permission to forge my name. His face changed. What are you talking about? The property management authorization. Melissa handles those forms. The signature came from an insurance claim you kept during my surgery. I never copied your signature. He said it quickly, and I believed he might be telling the truth about his own hand. But he did not ask whether the signature had been copied. He asked no question at all. Did you know she used it? I asked. He looked toward the counselor's closed office door. I knew you had authorized rentals. 8 weeks. No events. Deposits into my account. That arrangement did not cover costs, so you changed it without me. We adapted it, with a copied signature. He rubbed his face. Dad, I am asking you to stop forcing every bad decision into the worst possible interpretation. And I am asking you to stop renaming what you did. We left through separate doors. By Wednesday, the bank records began to arrive. Bennett Monroe Holdings had been formed 18 months earlier. Melissa owned 45%, Daniel 45%, and Patricia 10%. The initial deposit was a $5,000 transfer from Monroe House. Its operating agreement listed the cottage's short-term rental business as its principal asset, even though the company did not own the cottage. The records showed $37,670 of my net rental income diverted beyond what I had received. $12,000 went toward legitimate cottage work I had not authorized. $9,000 covered Monroe House payroll. $5,000 repaid Patricia's initial contribution. The remaining amount moved between the LLC and Daniel and Melissa's joint account in increments small enough to look ordinary. The bank also produced a copy of a preliminary commercial loan application. It requested $525,000. Proposed collateral included Monroe House, Patricia's residence, Daniel and Melissa's home equity position, and Lake Wren Cottage. The application described the cottage as pending contribution to Bennett Monroe Holdings. My estimated membership interest after contribution was 12%. I read that number 3 times. They expected me to contribute a property appraised at $640,000 to an LLC in exchange for 12%, while the LLC guaranteed a $500,000 loan for Patricia's failing business. If the loan defaulted, the bank could take the cottage. If the business succeeded, Patricia, Melissa, and Daniel would control 88% of the holding company. On the borrower certification page, Daniel had signed beneath a statement that all proposed contributors understood and approved the transaction. He had signed it 9 days before my birthday. The dinner had not been a preliminary discussion. They were celebrating conditional approval for a plan my son had already certified I supported. Lena watched me read the page. "This is the point where people often make a decision based on what they want the relationship to be," she said. "I need you to make one based on what the documents show." "What are my options?" "Continue the disputes. Demand return of the rental income. Notify the lender that your approval was falsely represented. Seek an injunction if they attempt any filing. You can also report the copied signature." "And Daniel?" "He signed a certification. His exposure depends on what he knew and what he intended. We do not invent either. We preserve the evidence and let him decide whether to tell the truth." I looked at the 12% again. "Send the lender everything." That afternoon, the loan was placed on administrative hold. At 6:10, Patricia arrived at my house. She wore the red jacket from the restaurant and carried no cake, no papers, and no visible fear. Patricia had built her life by entering rooms as if she owned the floor beneath them. She stood on my porch and said, "Frank, 2 families are about to be ruined because you misunderstood a financing structure. You should speak through your attorney. Attorneys charge money to make simple things ugly. Copied signatures are already ugly." She did not blink. "Melissa believed she had your verbal authorization to expand rentals. Did she believe she had authorization to copy my name? I am not discussing clerical issues. That is convenient." Patricia stepped closer. "Monroe House is more than me. 27 employees, vendors, young couples who paid deposits. Your refusal will send consequences through an entire community. Your borrowing sent those consequences. The ballroom expansion was Daniel's recommendation. That was new." "What?" "He managed the project. He said the added capacity would double winter revenue. Costs rose, reservations fell, and now he wants to act like he is only Melissa's helpless husband." I studied her face. Patricia was not confessing to help me. She was distributing blame before the building fell. "How much did Daniel guarantee?" I asked. "Ask your son." He said 80,000. Her mouth curved without humor. "Then he has lied to both of us." "How much?" 140. The number landed heavily. Daniel and Melissa's home did not have $140,000 of usable equity unless they had increased the line since I last knew. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you still think saying no protects him. It does not. Without the refinance, the lender calls the guarantees. Your son loses his house. Sophie changes schools. Melissa's marriage breaks. You will be sitting safely beside your lake while everyone else pays. You are describing choices the adults made. That is what old men say when they want clean hands." I felt anger rise, but beneath it was something steadier. "Elaine asked me to keep that cottage free of family debt." Patricia's expression hardened. "Elaine is gone. Her judgment is not. And if Daniel loses everything, then I will help Sophie remain safe. I will not hand you her future to repair your past." Patricia looked through the glass beside my door at the quiet house beyond. "You should be careful, Frank. Living alone can make a person overestimate how well he is managing." It was the second quiet threat in 4 days. "Good night, Patricia." She turned, then paused at the steps. "No judge will think it is reasonable for a confused 72-year-old widower to destroy 2 businesses over a birthday dinner. This is not about dinner. That is not how it will look." 3 mornings later, a process server handed me a petition asking the probate court to appoint Daniel as my temporary conservator. The envelope was thick enough to feel important and thin enough to hide how much damage it could do. I read it standing in the entryway while the process server returned to his car. In the petition, my son described me as an allegedly vulnerable adult exhibiting recent cognitive decline, financial paranoia, social isolation, and impaired judgment. He claimed I had become obsessed with the belief that family members were stealing from me. He listed my late property tax payment, a minor collision in a grocery store parking lot, and an evening 2 years earlier when I left a burner on beneath an empty kettle. He said I had hired an unfamiliar attorney who was encouraging estrangement. He said I had disrupted a profitable cottage business without understanding existing obligations and was threatening substantial waste of my assets. He did not mention the copied signature. He did not mention the loan application. He did not mention my birthday dinner. At the end, Daniel asked the court for immediate authority to manage my real estate, bank accounts, and legal claims until a full evaluation could be completed. My first reaction was not fear. It was disbelief so complete that I laughed once, aloud, in the empty hall. Then I reached the proposed order. If a judge signed it, Daniel could step into the very position I had revoked. He might not be able to transfer the cottage without court approval, but he could control accounts, negotiate claims, and argue that the refinance preserved my estate. I called Lena. She read the petition while I waited. "Do not call Daniel," she said. "Do not post about this, do not send a family email, and do not move large amounts of money. A court will be looking at your behavior from this moment forward." Can he do this? Anyone can file a petition. Winning is different. The court must decide whether you are unable to manage property and whether appointment is necessary. Your anger is evidence of being human, not incapacitated, but we answer facts with facts. The temporary request was scheduled for the following Tuesday. Lena asked whether I had a primary care physician, what medications I took, when I last had a cognitive screening, and whether anyone besides family regularly observed me managing daily life. I answered each question. She arranged an independent geriatric evaluation, not because she believed I was impaired, but because objective evidence was better than outrage. That weekend was the longest I had spent in my own house. Every ordinary mistake became suspicious to me. I walked into the laundry room and forgot why, then stood there wondering whether Daniel had been right. I searched for my reading glasses before finding them on my head. I wrote the wrong date on a check and tore it up. These were things I had done at 50, but once someone's names decline, memory becomes a room full of mirrors. You inspect every reflection. At home, I opened Elaine's recipe box and found the pot roast card still on the counter. Her handwriting ran downhill because she never used lines. I remembered her final months, when people sometimes spoke around her as if cancer had made her less present. She hated that. Once, after a nurse asked me what Elaine wanted while Elaine sat beside us, my wife said, "You can ask the person whose life it is." I said those words aloud in my kitchen. Then I began preparing for court. I gathered 12 months of bank statements, pension deposits, insurance records, tax receipts, utility payments, medical appointments, charitable contributions, and home maintenance invoices. I created a one-page monthly budget. I printed emails showing I had scheduled the cottage septic service, renewed insurance, challenged an incorrect pharmacy charge, and negotiated a lower cable bill. None of those acts made me a genius. That was the point. Competence was not perfection. It was the ordinary ability to understand choices and manage consequences. The geriatric evaluation lasted almost 3 hours. Dr. Miriam Lowe asked about my health history, sleep, grief, alcohol use, medications, and mood. She gave me words to remember, patterns to reproduce, numbers to subtract, and hypothetical bills to analyze. She asked what I understood about the cottage dispute. "My son and his wife want me to contribute property to a company they own so it can secure his mother-in-law's business loan," I said. "I do not consent. They say that refusal proves I am impaired." "Could refusing ever be a bad financial decision?" she asked. "Of course. Competent people make bad decisions, but this one exposes a debt-free property worth approximately $640,000 to a $525,000 loan for a business already unable to pay its balloon note. I would receive 12% of the company holding my asset. What would make you reconsider? Full financial statements, an independent appraisal of the business, a risk analysis, majority control proportional to my contribution, and a reason to violate my wife's request. I have seen none of those." Dr. Lowe wrote for nearly a minute. "You understand that an evaluation favorable to you may deepen the family conflict?" "Yes." "And that a result you dislike would still need to be disclosed to your attorney?" "Yes." Her report concluded that I showed no evidence of dementia or impaired financial capacity. It noted normal age-related lapses, grief, and understandable stress. It also recommended that I update emergency contacts and simplify a few account systems. I accepted all of it. A truthful report did not need to declare me flawless. The day before the temporary hearing, an adult protective services worker named Nora Hale arrived at my house. Daniel had apparently filed a report claiming I was being exploited by Lena. Nora inspected nothing without permission. She asked to see where I stored medication, whether I had food, how I paid bills, and how I had found my attorney. I showed her the online research and notes from the 3 firms I considered. She asked whether Lena had received money or property from me beyond a legal retainer. She had not. Nora asked whether Daniel had ever pressured me to sign documents. Yes, I said. That is why I hired her. I gave Nora copies of the title order, loan application, and copied signature. Her expression remained professional, but she spent longer on the LLC ownership page than anything else. "May I retain these?" she asked. "Please do." Before leaving, she said, "Families sometimes use the language of protection when the dispute is actually about control. My report will address both possibilities." At the temporary hearing, the courtroom was smaller than I expected. Daniel sat with his attorney on one side. Melissa and Patricia sat behind him. Daniel wore a blue tie Elaine had given him. Seeing it there felt like another misuse of something she had chosen with love. The judge did not grant Daniel control of my accounts. Dr. Lowe's preliminary letter and the absence of any emergency loss made that request too broad. But the judge set an expedited full hearing and ordered that neither side transfer, mortgage, or materially alter the cottage until then. I had no intention of doing so, yet hearing a judge restrict my property because my son had filed a petition felt like being punished for avoiding a theft. The court appointed a visitor to interview me and inspect relevant records. It also directed both sides to exchange financial documents and communications concerning the cottage and Bennett Monroe holdings. That last order changed the case. Outside the courtroom, Patricia said to Melissa, loudly enough for me to hear, "At least he can't hide the property now." I turned. "I have never hidden it," she smiled. "People hide assets in plain sight all the time." Lena touched my elbow, and we kept walking. The court-ordered exchange began 4 days later. Daniel's attorney produced hundreds of pages, medical appointment reminders, family messages, photographs of my cluttered garage, the late tax notice, and a repair estimate I had postponed. Buried among them were emails from the LLC because Lena's request had been specific enough that withholding them would risk sanctions. The first email that mattered was from Melissa to Daniel, dated 6 months earlier. "Platform income is finally high enough to show coverage if we combine it with Monroe House. We need Frank's property inside BMH before renewal. Do not mention event bookings." "He still thinks 8 weeks," Daniel replied. "He'll ask where the extra deposits went," Melissa wrote. "Then we call them reinvestment. He doesn't understand hospitality accounting." Daniel's answer was one word: fine. The second email came 3 weeks before my birthday. Patricia sent it to both of them. "The lender wants a clean deed, not just Dan's POA. If Frank resists, we need a capacity strategy. His tax notice and accident may be enough to get temporary control before the balloon date." Melissa answered, "Let's try the estate packet first. Court will make the family look unstable." Daniel did not answer that message. But 2 days later, he forwarded the name of the probate attorney who now represented him and wrote, "Keep this as backup only." The petition had not grown out of concern after I changed the locks. The capacity strategy existed before my birthday. They had reserved it like an emergency exit. The third email was worse. It included a draft agenda for the title meeting. Begin with beneficiary address update. Daniel explains cottage income consolidation. Present deed as administrative transfer into family LLC. Avoid loan discussion until signed. Notary completes acknowledgement. Beside item 4, Melissa had added, "If asked directly, say no, present mortgage." Technically, that would have been true for a few hours. The mortgage would be recorded after the deed. I read the agenda twice and had to leave Lena's conference room. In the hallway stood a water cooler beside a framed picture of the old schoolhouse. I filled a paper cup and watched my hands shake. Lena followed, but did not speak until I did. "He knew," I said. "The documents show he knew about the sequence and the backup attorney. They do not yet show he knew about the copied signature. Does that distinction matter?" "Legally, yes. Emotionally, you decide." I crushed the empty cup more sharply than I intended. Every time I find the edge of what he did, there is another inch beyond it. Then stop measuring with hope. Measure with records. That sentence stayed with me. For most of Daniel's life, I had interpreted his conduct according to the man I hoped he would become. If he failed to repay a loan, He had been overwhelmed. If he avoided a conversation, he needed time. If he let Melissa speak for him, he was keeping peace. Hope had softened every edge until I could no longer see the shape of his choices. Records had no such loyalty. The bank's fraud department provided access logs from the loan portal. My name had been used to create a contributor profile. The email address attached to it was Frank Bennett, family@protonmail.com, an account I had never opened. The profile stated I was 81 years old, not 72, and comfortable delegating all financial matters due to declining memory. A scanned copy of my driver's license had been uploaded. Daniel had kept that copy after my surgery. The electronic acknowledgement under my name came from the internet connection at Monroe House. Melissa's phone number was listed for verification. The bank had not relied solely on the false profile. Its title department insisted on speaking with me and receiving a deed signed before an approved closer. That was why they needed Friday's appointment. The safeguards had slowed them, but only by forcing them to bring me into the room. The more I learned, the more the birthday dinner made sense. They had not gathered merely to celebrate. They were rehearsing confidence. They had spent months converting my cottage from a family place into business revenue, my old power of attorney into apparent consent, and my age into a reason no one should question the gap between the two. Then I appeared at the restaurant with a single candle on my plate. I wondered whether Daniel remembered that candle when he signed the conservatorship petition. The court-appointed evaluator interviewed me for 90 minutes. She toured the house, reviewed my budget, asked about the loan, and requested permission to speak with my doctor, bank manager, neighbors, and Sophie's school counselor. I agreed. She also asked what outcome I wanted with Daniel. From the court? I asked. From any of this. I had prepared answers about title, money, and authority. I had not prepared that one. I want him to tell the truth without needing a document forced out of him, I said. I want my granddaughter out of the middle. I want my cottage back. I do not know what I want after that. Would you accept him as conservator under any circumstances? No. Would you accept a neutral professional if the court found limited assistance helpful? I considered it. I would accept advice. I would not accept control unless evidence showed I truly could not act. She nodded and closed her notebook. 2 nights later, my cottage security camera sent an alert at 11:43. I had installed 2 cameras after changing the locks, one facing the drive and one inside the entry. Daniel's truck pulled beside the shed. He used a key on the side door, discovered the lock had changed, then walked to a basement window. The latch on that window had been loose for years. He pushed it open and climbed inside. I called the county sheriff's non-emergency number and drove toward Lake Wren, keeping Lena on the phone. A deputy arrived before I did. Daniel was standing beside his truck with 2 plastic storage boxes at his feet. He told the deputy the boxes contained business records belonging to Bennett Monroe Holdings. I told the deputy the records had been stored inside my house and were subject to a court document exchange order. The deputy declined to decide ownership on the roadside. He photographed the boxes, wrote an incident report, and instructed Daniel to leave them pending direction from the attorneys. Daniel stared at me across the flashing lights. You called the police on your own, son. You climbed through my window because you locked me out of records we need for court. Your attorney has a process for requesting records. You always cared more about process than people. Process is what protects people when trust is gone. He looked older than 43. For the first time, I saw not just guilt, but exhaustion. Do you think I wanted any of this? He asked. I think you wanted every part except the consequences. The deputy shifted between us. Daniel got into his truck and left without the boxes. Inside, one was a portable printer, event menus, guest contracts, and cleaning records. Inside the other were file folders from Monroe House, including monthly statements Melissa had apparently moved to the cottage to keep them from Patricia's primary lender. The statements showed the venue's condition was worse than disclosed. It had missed payroll tax deposits, delayed vendor payments, and refunded wedding deposits using money from new bookings. The $525,000 loan would not have repaired a temporary timing problem. It would have moved a growing hole beneath my cottage. One folder contained printouts of messages between Patricia and Melissa. In one, Patricia wrote, "Your father-in-law owes us after all the holidays we included him. Do not let Daniel turn sentimental." Melissa replied, "Frank responds to guilt, especially about Sophie. We'll use that before capacity." I sat at the cottage dining table reading that line while the deputy completed his report outside. My family had studied my love for my granddaughter as a pressure point. For a moment, I wanted to take every document to the prosecutor, sell the cottage, change my number, and ensure none of them received another dollar or another minute of my life. Quiet justice sounds noble when described after the fact. In the middle of betrayal, quiet can feel like a room where anger has nowhere to go. I walked to the pantry doorway. The glass wine cabinet gleamed beneath new lights. Elaine's marked door was safe in my garage, waiting to be repaired. I pictured Sophie at 6, standing straight while her grandmother drew the first blue line above her hair. Protecting Sophie did not mean protecting every adult who had used her name. It also did not mean teaching her that love required endless access. I called Lena and told her to give the records to the bank, the court-appointed evaluator, and the appropriate authorities. All of them, I said. Do not remove Daniel's name to spare me. Are you sure? No. But do it. That was the lowest point of the entire matter, though I did not recognize it until later. Not the birthday dinner. Not the petition. It was the moment I stopped arranging facts to preserve my son's innocence. The following afternoon, Daniel left a voicemail. Dad, those boxes weren't supposed to be at the cottage. Melissa moved them. I didn't know what was inside. I was trying to get ahead of discovery because Patricia says some records could trigger a default. I know how that sounds. I know you won't believe me. Just, please don't let Sophie see all of it. I saved the message. Then I called him back. You filed a petition saying I cannot manage my own life, I said. You used Sophie's name to pressure me. You certified I approved a loan I had never seen. You climbed through my window. Which part do you want hidden from her? She is 16. Then the adults should have behaved in a way that did not require a false history. Melissa is falling apart. She copied my signature. I didn't know she did that. You knew I had not approved the authorization. He breathed heavily into the phone. Yes. It was the first clean answer he had given me. Did you know about the fake email account? Not at first. When did you learn? After the bank asked for the title appointment. Before my birthday? Yes. Did you tell Melissa to stop? He did not answer. Daniel? I told her we needed your real signature. I thought if we showed you the whole situation. The meeting agenda said to avoid the loan discussion until after the deed. Silence. I have the emails, I said. His voice broke. I was trying to keep my family from losing our house. By taking mine. By borrowing against it. Without my consent, that distinction belongs only to you. What do you want me to do? I had waited my whole life for my son to ask that question before the damage was done. Now that it came, it held no comfort. Withdraw the petition. Give the court and bank a truthful statement. Tell Sophie that I did not reject her on my birthday. Then accept whatever follows. Melissa says if I turn over everything, her mother could face charges. You are still asking me to choose which truth your family can afford. She is my wife, and I am your father. Those relationships tell you whom to love. They do not tell you when to lie. He said he needed time. The full hearing is in 9 days, I told him. Time has a date now. He did not withdraw the petition. Instead, his attorney offered a settlement. I would permit Bennett Monroe Holdings to continue cottage rentals for 1 year, contribute the property to the LLC but retain 51% voting control, and guarantee only $300,000 of the new loan. In exchange, Daniel would dismiss the conservatorship case, and Melissa would repay $20,000 of diverted income over 5 years. Lena read the proposal aloud, then looked at me. What do you think? They are offering to stop calling me incompetent if I surrender enough property. That is also how I read it. We rejected it. The next day, the court-appointed evaluator issued her report. She found me able to understand and manage my property, found no evidence Lena had exploited me, and expressed concern that the conservatorship petition was closely linked to a disputed transaction from which the proposed conservator and his spouse expected substantial benefit. She recommended denial. That should have ended the case. Daniel could still have withdrawn. Patricia persuaded him that withdrawing would look like an admission. So we went to the full hearing. The courtroom filled slowly. Daniel sat at counsel table with his attorney. Melissa and Patricia took the first bench behind him. Sophie was not there. The school counselor had helped arrange for her to stay with a friend so she would not have to watch adults turn her family into testimony. The judge began by explaining that the question was narrow. The hearing was not deciding who had behaved well at dinner, whether Monroe House deserved rescue, or who would inherit the cottage. The question was whether I lacked sufficient understanding or ability to manage my property, and whether a conservator was necessary. Daniel's attorney called him first. My son walked to the witness chair, raised his right hand, and promised to tell the truth. His voice did not shake. He described me as once meticulous but increasingly isolated after Elaine's death. He mentioned the burner, the parking lot collision, and the late tax payment. He said I had become suspicious after hiring Lena, terminated profitable rental arrangements without evaluating contracts, and reacted disproportionately to a misunderstood family financing discussion. "Why did you seek emergency authority?" his attorney asked. "I was afraid my father would make irreversible decisions based on grief and anger," Daniel said. "Did you intend to take his property?" "No. I intended to preserve it and stabilize a family business." "Did you believe the refinancing would benefit him?" "Yes. The cottage income would increase, and he would own an interest in the holding company." From the gallery, Patricia nodded. Daniel's attorney presented photographs of my garage shelves, the late notice, and the dent in my truck. He showed an email in which I called the other F of me's and 40,000 apart and the building of LC structure a deliberate theft, arguing that the language proved I had become fixed on an extreme interpretation. He asked Daniel how often he checked on me. "Several times a week," Daniel said. That was not true. Before my birthday, we had spoken perhaps twice a week, mostly by text, and seen each other 3 times in 2 months. But it was a small lie beside larger ones, the kind people use because they expect affection to blur the record. When Lena stood to question him, she began with the ordinary details. "Mr. Bennett, what is your father's monthly pension income?" Daniel hesitated. "Around 3,000. It is 4,600 before tax. Do you know his mortgage payment? The house is paid off." "Correct." "What medication does he take?" "Blood pressure medicine." "Which one?" "I don't remember." "When did you last accompany him to a medical appointment?" "After his pneumonia." 22 months ago? If that's the date. "How many times did you eat with him in the 6 months before filing this petition?" His attorney objected that the number was irrelevant. The judge allowed the question as it related to Daniel's opportunity to observe me. "I don't know," Daniel said. "We saw each other regularly." Lena showed him a calendar compiled from messages and visits both sides had produced. "Can you identify more than 3 in-person visits?" Daniel studied the page. "Not from this." "On your father's 72nd birthday, did you plan to dine at his house?" His shoulders tightened. "Yes." "Did you go?" "No. A work issue came up." "Was there a burst supply line at Maple Street?" "There had been a plumbing concern." Lena placed a maintenance log on the screen. The Maple Street site superintendent had provided it in response to a subpoena. No burst line was reported that day. A minor leak had been repaired the previous morning. "Were you at Lake and Elm Restaurant with your wife and mother-in-law instead?" Lena asked. "Yes." "Discussing a loan involving your father's cottage?" "Yes." "Did your father know about the proposed collateral before that night?" "We had discussed estate simplification." "That was not my question." Daniel looked toward the judge. "No, not the complete structure. But 9 days before his birthday, you certified to Great Lakes Community Bank that all proposed contributors understood and approved the transaction. Was that statement true?" His attorney objected that the bank application exceeded the hearing's scope. Lena answered that Daniel claimed the transaction motivated his concern and would benefit me. His honesty and conflict of interest were directly relevant to whether he should control my estate. The judge allowed the question. Daniel looked at the certification displayed on the monitor. "I believed he would approve once we explained it. So the statement was not true when you signed it." "Not technically. Truth is often technical in signed financial documents, isn't it?" His attorney objected to the comment. The judge told Lena to ask a question. "What percentage of Bennett Monroe Holdings would your father receive for contributing a cottage appraised at $640,000? 12% initially. What percentage would you and your wife continue to own? 90% together before Patricia's interest adjusted. The operating agreement says you and your wife would own 76% after contribution, Patricia 12, and your father 12, correct?" "Correct." "Would the cottage secure a $525,000 loan, along with other property? If Monroe House defaulted, could the lender foreclose against the cottage?" "Eventually, yes." "Did you disclose that risk to your father before certifying his approval?" "No." The courtroom was silent except for a ventilation fan above the door. Lena moved to the property management authorization. She placed my genuine insurance signature beside the signature on the authorization. Daniel acknowledged they were identical. "Did Frank Bennett sign this authorization?" she asked. "I did not see him sign it." "Did he tell you he signed it?" "No." "Did you know he had limited rentals to 8 weeks, prohibited events, and required deposits into his cottage account?" "Yes." "Did Bennett Monroe Holdings follow those limits?" "No." "When did you learn your wife was relying on this authorization?" "I don't remember exactly." Lena showed him an email in which he told Melissa, "Use the signed management page if platform asks." Dad won't want operational details. Does this refresh your memory? Daniel read it. Yes. Was your father unable to manage property when you wrote that? I had concerns. Name one concern you documented before the loan needed his cottage. He looked toward his attorney. You may answer, the judge said. I didn't document them. Did you ask his doctor for an evaluation? No. Did you request a family meeting about memory? No. Did you contact Adult Protective Services before he revoked your power of attorney? No. Did your mother-in-law email you before his birthday suggesting a capacity strategy if he refused the deed? Daniel's eyes moved toward Patricia. She did not nod this time. Yes, he said. Did you send her the name of a probate attorney as a backup? Yes. So concern about your father's capacity became a legal strategy before you ever asked his doctor whether he had a problem. I was trying to be prepared. Prepared for his incapacity or prepared for his refusal? Daniel's face reddened. For several seconds, he said nothing. His refusal, he answered. I heard Melissa inhale sharply behind him. Lena returned to counsel table. She could have asked more, but the answer had reached the center of the case. Dr. Lowe testified next. She explained that I understood my assets, income, obligations, the proposed transaction, and its risks. She found no dementia and no disorder preventing financial decisions. On cross-examination, Daniel's attorney asked whether normal cognitive tests guaranteed good judgment. No, she said. Capacity does not require that relatives approve of the decision. It requires the ability to understand relevant information, appreciate consequences, reason about options, and communicate a choice. Mr. Bennett did all four. The court-appointed evaluator gave similar testimony. She noted that my home was safe, my bills current, my accounts reconciled, and my legal representation independently selected. She also described the conflict of interest created by appointing Daniel to control property needed for a loan benefiting him and his spouse. Then I testified. Lena asked about my career, the trust, Elaine's wishes, and the cottage rentals. I described the birthday dinner without dramatizing it. I told the court what I heard and what the later documents confirmed. I admitted the late tax payment, the collision, and the burner. I admitted grief had made me withdraw socially. I admitted I should have reviewed the rental statements sooner. Why did you cancel the title meeting? Lena asked. Because I had not been told the purpose, did not consent to transfer the cottage, and no longer trusted my son to act under the power of attorney. Do you understand what could happen to Monroe House without the refinance? It may be sold, restructured, or foreclosed. Employees may lose work. Couples may need refunds. Those are serious consequences. Why not use the cottage to prevent them? Because the proposed loan moves risk from adults who created the debt to property they do not own. The business records show the problem is not temporary. The loan would delay the loss while increasing it. And even if it were a good investment, I have the right to say no. Daniel's attorney asked whether anger over a missed birthday had influenced me. It influenced me to pay attention, I said. The records influenced my decision. He asked whether I intended to punish my son by changing my estate plan. I intend to appoint an independent successor trustee because Daniel used future inheritance as if it were present authority. So you are removing him? From control, yes. Not necessarily from every benefit. I have not made that final decision. Would your late wife have wanted you to forgive him? Lena objected. The judge sustained it before I could answer. I was grateful. Elaine had been used enough. The bank investigator was the final witness. She explained the false contributor profile, the invented email account, the use of Melissa's phone, and the electronic acknowledgement originating from Monroe House. She confirmed that the bank had required my personal signature because the old power of attorney prohibited self-interested transfers, and because the proposed deed placed property into an entity controlled by the agent and his spouse. Did Mr. Frank Bennett ever directly approve the loan? Lena asked. No. Did the bank receive a certification stating he had? Yes. Who signed it? Daniel Bennett. The judge recessed for 20 minutes. Daniel remained at counsel table. Melissa leaned forward and whispered urgently to him. Patricia stood in the aisle speaking to their attorney. I could not hear the words, but I saw Daniel shake his head. Melissa gripped his shoulder. He pulled away. Then he stood and walked toward Lena and me. I need to correct my testimony, he said. Lena looked at his attorney, who was hurrying across the courtroom. Speak to your counsel. I already have. His attorney reached us and asked for a private conference. The lawyers met near the clerk's desk. When the judge returned, Daniel's attorney announced that his client wished to withdraw the petition and make a supplemental statement. The judge said withdrawal did not automatically erase issues raised by sworn testimony or the financial documents. She allowed Daniel to return to the witness chair after his attorney conferred with him. This time, when he raised his hand, it shook. "My father is not incapacitated," he said. "I knew that when I filed. I told myself he was grieving and overreacting, but the real reason was that we needed control of the cottage before the loan deadline. I knew he had not approved the loan application when I certified it. I knew Melissa had expanded rentals beyond his permission. I did not know at first that she copied his signature, but I knew before his birthday, and I did nothing. I sent the probate lawyer's name. I approved using a capacity petition if he refused." Melissa stood. "Daniel, stop." The judge ordered her to sit or leave. Daniel looked at me, then back at the judge. "I lied about the plumbing emergency because I did not want to face him before the title meeting. I let my daughter believe he wanted to be alone. That was also a lie." Patricia left the courtroom. Daniel continued. "My wife and mother-in-law pressured me, but I signed the documents. I am responsible for that. My father should control his property. The petition should never have been filed." No one applauded. Real truth rarely arrives with music. It lands awkwardly, after the damage, and asks to be measured against what it can no longer repair. The judge denied the petition with prejudice, meaning the same allegations could not simply be repackaged and filed again without materially new evidence. She found no basis for a conservatorship and stated that the proceeding appeared to have been used to gain leverage in a financial transaction. She ordered Daniel to pay a substantial portion of my legal fees, subject to later determination. She continued the restriction, preventing any disputed filing against the cottage until the title and fraud matters were resolved. She directed the clerk to send relevant materials to the county prosecutor and permitted Adult Protective Services to continue its investigation. Then she looked at me. "Mr. Bennett, do you want any protective arrangement for financial assistance going forward?" I stood. "I have hired an accountant to review the rental records, and I will name an independent successor trustee. I welcome advice. I do not consent to my son controlling my property." The judge nodded. "That distinction is clear." Outside the courthouse, reporters were not waiting. There were no cameras. Monroe House was locally known, but ours was still what most family disasters are. Enormous to the people inside and invisible to everyone passing on the sidewalk. Daniel came down the steps alone. Melissa and Patricia had left through another exit. "Dad," he said. I stopped but did not move closer. "I'm sorry." "For which part?" He swallowed. "All of it." "That is too large to be an answer." He looked down at his shoes. "I'm sorry I lied on your birthday. I'm sorry I certified the loan. I'm sorry I knew about the signature and kept going. I'm sorry I used the court to scare you. I'm sorry I let Sophie think you didn't want her." It was the first apology specific enough to carry weight. "Why did you tell the truth?" I asked. "Because when the bank investigator described that fake profile, I heard how we had turned you into a character. Old, confused, easy to manage. I knew it wasn't you. I knew it the whole time. And before that? I kept thinking I could fix the next piece. Save the venue, save our house, protect Melissa, calm you down. Every lie was supposed to buy enough time for the previous lie to stop mattering. Did it work?" He almost smiled, then did not. "No, truth is the first payment, Daniel. It is not the whole balance." "I know." I left with Lena. In the parking structure, she asked if I was all right. "No," I said, "but I am still in charge of what happens next." That was enough for the day. The consequences unfolded over months, not in one satisfying afternoon. Great Lakes Community Bank denied the refinance and referred the false profile, certification, and copied signature for investigation. Patricia's existing lender issued default notices after discovering records she had withheld. Monroe House entered a court-supervised receivership. A regional hospitality company eventually purchased the property for less than Patricia owed, but enough to preserve 16 of the 27 jobs and honor most prepaid events. Patricia lost ownership, her office, and the public identity she had protected more fiercely than her solvency. The civil claim over the cottage income went to mediation. The forensic accounting confirmed that $37,670 in net revenue had been diverted after the deposits I received. Because some of that money paid for improvements that remained with the cottage, I agreed to credit $12,400. Daniel and Melissa became jointly responsible for the remaining $25,270, plus a negotiated share of legal and accounting costs. They could not pay it at once. We entered a court-enforceable repayment agreement secured by their share of home equity. I did not demand the sale of Sophie's home. That was my moral line. Their house would not be used to make a dramatic point while she was still in school. But if they sold or refinanced, my judgment would be paid before they received proceeds. Melissa accused me of using Sophie as an excuse to look merciful. Perhaps some of my decisions did contain pride. Justice does not purify the person seeking it. I simply knew I could protect my rights without making a 16-year-old pack her room in the middle of a semester. The criminal investigation treated each person differently. Patricia's business records led to tax penalties and a negotiated resolution involving repayment and restrictions on future fiduciary roles. Melissa admitted creating the false contributor email and using the copied signature. Her lawyer reached an agreement that required restitution, community service, financial fraud counseling, and a probationary period. Daniel's cooperation and corrected testimony mattered, but it did not erase his certification. He entered a separate diversion agreement, paid fines, completed ethics training, and could no longer manage financial documents for his employer. I did not control those outcomes. Once I gave authorities complete records, the decisions belonged to people whose job was to weigh evidence. That was difficult for me. Part of quiet justice is accepting that justice is not the same as designing every punishment yourself. Daniel and Melissa separated 2 months after the hearing. I was not surprised, but I did not celebrate. Their marriage had contained real years, not just crimes against me. They entered counseling, first together for Sophie and then separately. By spring, Melissa moved into an apartment near her mother. Daniel remained in the house until Sophie finished the school year. Patricia moved into a smaller condominium. She told friends I had destroyed Monroe House because I resented her closeness with my family. Some believed her. People often prefer a simple feud to a complicated set of bank records. I stopped trying to correct every version. The people who mattered either saw the documents or learned to ask better questions. Sophie came to Lake Wren 3 weeks after the hearing. Daniel drove her and waited in the truck until I invited him onto the porch. He declined. "This is your time," he said. That was a small sign he was beginning to understand boundaries. Sophie walked through the cottage slowly. The event furniture was gone. I had removed the wine cabinet and repaired the wall. In the kitchen, 2 sawhorses supported the old pantry door. I had sanded the damp edge but left every pencil mark untouched. She ran one finger over the line marked age 9. "Mom said the door was rotten. One edge was damaged. Why would she throw it outside?" "Because she was changing the room for guests." Sophie looked at me. "You always answer the exact question. Is that bad?" "No. Everyone else keeps answering the question they wish I asked." We spent the afternoon rehanging the door. She held the level while I set the hinges. When it swung into place, the new, lower trim showed pale against the old wood, but the blue marks stood straight beside the pantry again. Over grilled cheese, Sophie asked whether I was going to prison testify against her mother. I told her I had provided records and would answer truthfully if called, but I did not want her mother imprisoned. I also told her I could not promise what authorities would decide. "Dad says he deserves whatever happens," she said. "Your father has started telling the truth. That matters. Do you forgive him?" "Not yet." She considered that. "Mom says forgiveness is what families do. Forgiveness can be part of family. So can distance. So can repayment. So can waiting to see whether an apology becomes behavior. Can you love someone and not forgive them?" I looked toward the pantry door. "Yes, but it is an uncomfortable kind of love." Before she left, I gave her a copy of Elaine's handwritten note about the cottage. It was not a legal instruction, and I explained that. It simply said, "Keep Lake Wren, a place Sophie can come without owing anyone anything." Sophie read it twice and pressed the page flat with both hands. "They said the loan was for me." People sometimes use a child's future to justify the adult's present fear. Was any of it for me? Your father was afraid you would lose your home. That fear was real. What he chose to do with it was wrong. She folded the copy carefully. That's the first answer that doesn't make him either a monster or a victim. She was 16 and already asking for a truth the adults had avoided. I changed my estate plan that summer. The cottage remained in my revocable trust. A licensed trust company became successor trustee, with my longtime accountant named as trust advisor. Sophie's education provisions remained. Daniel's eventual share was reduced by any unpaid judgment and placed under independent management rather than his direct control. Melissa and Patricia received no authority, benefit, or role. I also created a springing power of attorney, naming 2 people who did not benefit from my estate and requiring written confirmation from a physician before major authority activated. The document was more cumbersome than the old one. I was grateful for every line. I hired a professional cottage manager for a limited 6-week summer season. No events. No LLC owned by relatives. Every deposit entered an account I reviewed monthly with my accountant. The income paid taxes, maintenance, and a small annual scholarship at the housing nonprofit where Elaine had once worked. It supported students learning carpentry, electrical work, and building inspection. Patricia had said property should serve the living. She was right about that one sentence. She was wrong that serving the living meant serving her debt. Daniel began repaying me 60 days after the mediation. The first payment was $400. He sent it through the agreed account with no message. The second month, he sent $400 again. The third month, $500 because he had worked overtime. Consistency did what tears could not. It did not restore trust, but it gave trust a place to begin measuring. He also started calling every Sunday at 7. I answered the first few times and kept the conversations short. He did not ask about inheritance. He did not ask me to speak to Melissa. He told me about work, Sophie's soccer games, and counseling. When he apologized, I asked him to name the act. Eventually, he stopped saying "for everything" and spoke clearly. "I'm sorry I let Melissa use your rental income after I knew the deposits were wrong. I'm sorry I treated your power of attorney like permission instead of responsibility. I'm sorry I filed a case about your mind when the real problem was my choices." Specific apologies did not make forgiveness automatic. They did make conversation possible. 6 months after the hearing, Daniel asked if he could visit Lake Wren alone. I said yes, for 2 hours, while I was there. He arrived carrying the old blue tie from court in a paper bag. "Mom gave me this," he said. "I wore it because I thought it made me look trustworthy. Clothes cannot do that." "I know." He set the bag aside. We walked to the dock. The water was gray and flat, with thin ice around the posts. "I used to think you and Mom left me the cottage because I was your son," he said. "We planned for it to support the family after I was gone." I heard the first part and ignored the second. "You also ignored after I was gone." He winced. "Yes." We stood without speaking for a while. "Melissa says you ruined her mother," he said eventually. "What do you say?" "I say the loan was already failing. We tried to move the failure onto you." "That is accurate. I loved her. I know. Part of me still does. I know that too." He looked across the water. "I thought choosing my wife meant taking her side every time. Marriage requires loyalty. It does not require blindness. Mom would have known how to stop this before it got so far. Your mother tried to teach both of us. We did not always listen." That was as close as we came to peace that winter. On my 73rd birthday, I made no restaurant reservation. I drove to Lake Wren before noon with groceries, Elaine's recipe box, and a new brass number 3 for the cake. Sophie arrived after school. She had passed her driving test and insisted on parking by herself, badly but safely. We cooked pot roast together, though she added too much rosemary and refused to admit it. At 5:30, Daniel's truck appeared on the lane. He had been invited for dessert, not dinner. That boundary had been mine. He parked, walked to the porch, and knocked even though he once had keys to every door. I opened it. He held a small wrapped package. "May I come in?" "Yes." Inside the package was a restored brass door knocker from the old Monroe House side entrance. Patricia had thrown it into a storage auction, and Daniel had bought it for $12. He had polished it but left the scratches. "I thought you might use it on the workshop," he said. "Or throw it away. Your choice." There were no documents beneath it. No forms. No request. Sophie brought out the cake. The icing leaned to one side, and the numbers 7 and 3 were different colors because the grocery store had run out of matching candles. Daniel started singing. His voice cracked on the second line. Sophie laughed, and I did too. Before I blew out the candles, I looked around the table. The pantry door stood in its old place. Elaine's pencil marks remained. Daniel sat with both hands visible, asking nothing. Sophie sat between us, not as a messenger, not as collateral, but as a granddaughter waiting for cake. The year before, my son had refused dinner with me because another table offered him a way to avoid the truth. He and his wife had raised champagne over photographs of my house and counted my trust as one more asset they could move. They believed age made me easy to manage, loneliness made me easy to guilt, and love made me unable to say no. They were wrong. But the deepest lesson was not that I had defeated them. Families are not buildings, and a father cannot repair one by simply removing every damaged board. Some beams can be reinforced, some must carry less weight, some doors need new locks. The work begins by naming what is rotten and what is still worth saving. I did not return Daniel's power. I did not erase the judgment. I did not pretend the hearing had never happened. I also did not banish him forever so that anger could become the only thing I inherited from the year. I let evidence decide property. I let consequences answer deception. I let time test the apology. Then I blew out the candles. Sophie cut the first slice and placed it in front of me. Daniel poured coffee. Outside, Lake Wren turned gold beneath the evening sky, and the house settled around us with the familiar small sounds of cooling wood. For the first time since Elaine died, the table did not feel full because every chair was occupied. It felt full because no one sitting there had been tricked, pressured, or used to secure someone else's future. It was my birthday, and this time, I chose the table.